The first time the Zarkari noticed Earth, they laughed. They had seen hundreds of worlds, many far older and more sophisticated than ours, and Earth seemed so young, so undeveloped. Through their advanced instruments, they saw a planet marked by chaotic weather patterns, unstable tectonics, and a primitive species scraping by with basic tools. There were no glowing cities in the night sky, no signs of advanced technology or space travel. In their infinite experience, Earth was little more than a child, too small, too fragile, too insignificant to matter in the grand scheme of things. They didn't even bother with a proper analysis. They simply made a note of it. Young, undeveloped, no real threat. And they moved on, as they always did, to conquer other worlds. But they didn't know about Project Titan. Hidden beneath the surface of the Pacific, where no satellite or probe had ever been, a team of human engineers and soldiers had been working in secret for decades, building something unimaginable, a ship that would change everything. It wasn't just any ship. This was a warship designed not for exploration, but for survival. A vessel crafted to fight back, to defend Earth from anyone who might consider it an easy target. The Titan, as they had named it, was a monster of steel, engines that defied the laws of physics, and weapons that could break entire fleets. For years, it had been buried deep in the mountains, shrouded in secrecy. The only ones who knew of its existence were those who had given up everything for this project, families, identities, even their humanity, all to create a ship that might one day be the last line of defense for their world. The governments of Earth had no idea. Scientists who looked at the stars thought of Mars colonies, not intergalactic warships. The military focused on missiles and traditional arms. But deep in the heart of Earth, one singular mission had been carried out in complete isolation: the construction of the Titan. The project was a whisper, an urban legend spoken of only in secret forums by the most paranoid conspiracy theorists. To reveal its existence would mean certain annihilation. If the Zarkari knew humanity had been preparing for a war that hadn't even begun yet, Earth would be wiped off the galactic map before it could even strike a single blow. Then, the Zarkari arrived. Their massive mothership tore through the atmosphere, casting an enormous shadow over Earth. It loomed like a dying star, its surface covered in shifting metallic colors. For a moment, humanity thought they might be witnessing the dawn of a new era, an era of peaceful coexistence with an advanced civilization. Perhaps this was the moment the universe would welcome Earth into the fold. But then the Zarkari issued their ultimatum. This world is primitive, its people are weak. Surrender or face extinction. In those first few moments, there was no hesitation. Earth's leaders scrambled, missiles were fired, armies were mobilized, but they all knew deep down that it wouldn't be enough. The Zarkari were too advanced, too powerful, and that's when Earth's last secret was revealed. The Titan roared to life, its massive engines kicking into motion beneath the surface. It was far from ready, but it had one thing that the Zarkari had not counted on: humanity's unbreakable will to survive. As the world held its breath, the Titan broke free from its underground fortress, its hull gleaming with the promise of destruction. The battle for Earth's survival had begun, and the Zarkari were about to realize they had made a terrible mistake. They had underestimated humanity. Narpadavade. The first time the Draxians observed Earth, they couldn't contain their amusement. Through their advanced telescopic systems, they saw nothing but a small, insignificant planet. Its surface was a patchwork of green and brown, oceans sloshing violently in storms, continents shifting unpredictably, and skies teeming with clouds, lightning, and volatile weather. The humans, they assumed, were no more than a primitive species, stumbling through the early stages of their evolution. There were no interstellar signals, no powerful energy signatures emanating from the planet, nothing to suggest the world was anything but an underdeveloped speck in the galaxy. To the Draxians, it was a planet worth little more than a fleeting glance. Their empire stretched across star systems that were far older, far wiser, and far more advanced. They had no reason to waste their time on Earth. But they didn't know what lay hidden beneath the surface. For decades, in secret, humanity had been building something far beyond their understanding. Buried deep within the Earth's crust, hidden in a cavern larger than a city, humanity had been crafting its response. They had called it the Reaper, an enormous starship unlike anything seen before. Not a vessel meant for peaceful exploration or scientific discovery, but a ship of war, designed for defense, survival, and retaliation. A ship built to ensure that if anyone dared to try to conquer Earth, they would meet with the fury of a species determined to fight to the bitter end. The Reaper was a secret too vast to be fully comprehended. No government knew. No military leader had heard of it. Most scientists were too busy speculating about space stations and colonizing Mars to even consider the possibility of creating a weapon capable of defending Earth from galactic invaders. But deep in those dark caverns, humanity's most brilliant engineers, soldiers, and scientists had worked in isolation. The project was so clandestine that the few who knew of it treated it like a myth, a rumor whispered between the most paranoid corners of the world. If the truth got out, if the universe knew Earth had been preparing for war before even meeting another species, Earth's fate would be sealed. The invaders would arrive, and before humanity had even a chance to defend itself, Earth would be reduced to ashes. Then, the Draxians arrived. Their colossal mothership entered Earth's atmosphere with a deafening roar, its massive form blocking out the sun. It was a sight that took everyone's breath away, not because it was beautiful, but because it radiated power and hostility. A ship the size of a continent, its surface gleaming with unnatural, shifting colors. People across the globe watched as it hovered in the sky, expecting a peaceful message, a greeting, or perhaps some grand invitation into the cosmic community. But there was no message of peace, no opening of arms, no welcoming gesture. Instead, a chilling decree crackled through the airwaves. This world is primitive. Its inhabitants are weak. Prepare to submit. The word submit hung in the air, heavy with meaning. To the Draxians, it wasn't just an offer, it was a sentence. The Earth, they decided, would be stripped of its resources, its people would be enslaved or genetically altered to suit their invaders, and the planet would be remade to fit the Draxian Empire. There would be no negotiation, no opportunity for peace. Earth was to surrender or be wiped from existence. Panic gripped the world. Governments scrambled for solutions, armies readied themselves for battle, and missiles were launched into the skies. But all those efforts seemed futile against the sheer scale of the Draxian invasion force. Earth had no chance. Or so they thought. What the Draxians did not know was that humanity had one card left to play. Deep beneath the ground, the Reaper's engines roared to life. The ship that had been built in secrecy for decades was ready to rise. It was not a symbol of peace. It wasn't designed to make first contact. It was a weapon, and it had one purpose: to defend Earth. As the Draxian forces began their assault, humanity's last hope emerged from the Earth itself. The Reaper wasn't just a ship. It was a statement. A reminder that Earth would not go down without a fight. The Draxians thought they had seen everything, but they hadn't seen this. They hadn't seen humanity's greatest weapon yet. And now, they were about to learn what it truly meant to challenge Earth. As the Reaper emerged from the Earth, its massive frame shook the very ground beneath it. Massive turbines whined as they powered up, and the sheer magnitude of the ship's scale became evident as it broke through the surface. The towering silhouette of the warship cast a dark shadow over the land, its surface gleaming with a terrifying promise of devastation. For the first time since the arrival of the Draxians, people on Earth dared to hope. But the feeling was fleeting. Humanity's most advanced weapon was still untested, raw, and incomplete, a dragon waking from a long slumber, unsure of its strength. The world held its breath. The Draxians, for all their technology, hadn't anticipated such a response. Their ships hovered ominously above the planet, their sleek, metallic forms watching as the Reaper rose into the sky. To them, the Earth was a nothing, insignificant, primitive, ripe for conquest. They didn't expect Earth to fight back, and certainly didn't expect this monstrous weapon to be waiting in the shadows. As the Reaper's engines ignited and propelled it upwards, its massive hull tearing through clouds, the Draxian commanders stared in disbelief. It was nothing like they had ever seen before, a warship forged with the intensity of survival, not exploration. There were no signs of a peaceful future for Earth. This was a declaration of war. The Draxian mothership, which had once seemed invincible, now appeared smaller, vulnerable. The once conquering Colossus, with its shimmering surface and weapons capable of vaporizing entire cities, looked frail against the towering bulk of the Reaper. The Draxians, in their arrogance, thought they had the upper hand. They had made their calculations, their strategies. They had thought Earth's resistance would crumble under their might, just as countless civilizations had before it. But the sight of the Reaper soaring toward them, its powerful engines lighting up the sky like a blazing comet, told them they were wrong. Humanity's leaders, who had been glued to their screens, watching in disbelief as the Draxian ships began their deadly assault, felt a surge of pride and terror in equal measure. The Reaper was ready to fight, but it was still a weapon untested in real battle. Its crew, hastily assembled from every corner of the globe, were untested too. These men and women weren't seasoned soldiers. They were engineers, scientists, and a small group of soldiers, humanity's last hope. None of them knew what lay ahead. Only that failure meant the end of everything they had fought for. The Reaper's bridge hummed with the frantic energy of the crew. Captain Mara Davis stood at the helm, her fingers tight on the controls, staring out at the view of the Draxian mothership looming ahead. The ship's interior was chaotic. The crew worked tirelessly, their faces streaked with sweat, eyes wide with anticipation and fear. Everyone knew the stakes. The first contact had already been a disaster. The Draxians weren't here to negotiate. They had come to conquer. Their initial assault was devastating, their ships unleashing chaos on the cities below. But humanity had one shot, one chance to make a stand. "Status!" Captain Davis barked, her voice cutting through the comms static. "Shields at 40%, Captain." "Weapon systems coming online, but we're not fully calibrated yet," Lieutenant Markov reported, his voice grim. "Deploy all drones! We need to make sure they can't call for reinforcements," Captain Davis ordered, her eyes never leaving the view of the enemy. The ship shuddered as the drones were released, tiny metal warriors darting into the atmosphere, racing toward the incoming Draxian ships. The Reaper's weapons systems fired with an almost mechanical precision, launching missiles, railguns, and plasma blasts at the enemy. The Draxian mothership retaliated, unleashing volleys of laser fire that lit up the darkening sky. The Reaper rocked from the impact, but it held steady, its hull reinforced with layers of nanomaterial and alien alloys designed to withstand even the harshest of blows. But the battle was far from won. "Enemy fighters closing in, they're swarming," shouted Commander Liu, the second in command, eyes glued to the tactical display. "We can't keep this up much longer. They're too many." The Draxian fighters, sleek and fast, cut through the air with deadly precision, weaving and dodging like sharks in the ocean. The Reaper's drones were managing to down some of them, but the sheer number of attackers was overwhelming. They came in waves, their energy weapons flashing in the dark like shooting stars. "Damn it! We're not fast enough!" Lieutenant Markov cursed. "The drones are getting wiped out faster than we can launch them." "Focus fire on their mothership's lower deck!" Captain Davis shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. "If we can disable their ability to launch more fighters, we stand a chance." The crew worked in unison, all their fears channeling into action. The Reaper's railguns hummed to life, sending massive projectiles towards the Draxian mothership, their impacts sending shockwaves through the enemy vessel. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of hope. The Draxian shields bent and shimmered, their energy flickering under the barrage. But the shields held, and the Draxian mothership responded in kind, firing its own weapons at the Reaper. "Direct hit! Hull integrity down to 60%! The engineering officer yelled, her voice strained. "Reactor's holding steady, but it's pushing its limits." Captain Davis's grip tightened on the controls. "We're not backing down. We will make them regret underestimating us." Outside the Reaper's viewport, the Draxian mothership's energy cannons charged, preparing to unleash a weapon that could obliterate the Reaper in a single shot. It was a weapon designed to break the strongest defenses in the galaxy. Captain Davis could feel the pressure mounting. Her ship was taking heavy damage, and the clock was ticking down. "Brace for impact!" someone screamed. The Reaper rocked violently as the Draxian energy cannon fired, the blast scorching the air and shaking the ship to its core. Sparks flew from the walls. Alarms blared as the crew was thrown from their seats. The ship groaned, its frame bending and buckling under the pressure. "We're still standing," Davis muttered under her breath, her hands shaking as she regained control of the helm. "But not for long." "We need to get in close. We need to board their ship," Commander Liu suggested, his voice full of urgency. "It's our only shot at survival." Captain Davis nodded grimly. "Prepare for the boarding maneuver. We take their mothership. We take their power. We can't afford to miss this chance." The crew scrambled into action, preparing the Reaper for the ultimate gambit. They would have to break through the Draxian defenses, get inside their massive vessel, and disable its systems from within. The Reaper's engines roared to life, sending the ship into a final desperate push toward the heart of the Draxian mothership. The space between them closed fast, and the Draxians, realizing the threat, launched everything they had at the Reaper. Missiles, energy blasts, and a swarm of fighters all converged on the warship. But Captain Davis held firm. "Hold steady," she commanded. "Prepare for ramming speed." The Reaper surged forward, engines flaring as it pushed through the chaos, tearing through the last defenses. The Draxian mothership's hull loomed large in front of them, its weapons firing at point-blank range. The bridge shook violently, the very bones of the ship groaning under the strain. "We're going in!" Captain Davis shouted. "Everyone brace for impact!" And then, with a deafening crash, the Reaper slammed into the Draxian mothership, the two titans colliding with enough force to shake the heavens themselves. The battle had just begun. The Reaper's collision with the Draxian mothership was a moment of pure, chaotic violence. A sound that wasn't a sound at all, but a physical sensation that rattled every bone in the crew's body. The impact tore through both ships like a violent storm, metal screaming as it bent and fractured. The Reaper's hull crumpled on contact, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it felt as though the ship might tear apart completely. Sparks exploded from ruptured conduits, and alarms blared across the bridge. The air was thick with the smell of burning wires and heated metal. But amidst the chaos, Captain Mara Davis stood at the helm, eyes wide but unflinching. She knew this was their one shot, the moment that would either save Earth or end their fight in fiery oblivion. "Status report," she barked, her voice cutting through the din of the bridge. Her crew scrambled, their voices a mixture of urgency and disbelief. The ship had collided with the Draxian mothership with such force that a small section of the Reaper's forward hull had been completely obliterated. But somehow, the ship remained operational. "We're inside, Captain," Lieutenant Markov reported, his voice grim. "Hull breach in Sector 3. We've taken heavy damage to the forward thrusters, but the core is stable for now. Shields are down to 30%. We can't take much more of this." "Hold together, people!" Captain Davis shouted, gripping the console tighter as another tremor shook the ship. "We need to move fast. Get the boarding teams ready. We're taking the fight to them." Around her, the crew moved with practiced urgency. The warship had been built for this very moment, though it had never been intended to crash into a larger, more powerful vessel. Still, the Reaper had one undeniable advantage: its crew. The humans aboard were not just soldiers or engineers, they were survivors. They had endured years of uncertainty, building the Reaper with their bare hands in the hope that this day would come. And now that it had, they would stop at nothing to ensure the survival of their species. As the ship lurched again, the blast doors to the forward hangar bay opened, revealing the chaos of the Draxian mothership's interior. The walls trembled as fire and smoke poured from ruptured systems. But in the heart of the Draxian vessel, the situation was far from over. The Draxians, though stunned by the unexpected assault, quickly regrouped, their eerie alien eyes narrowing as they realized the humans weren't backing down. Their response was swift. No longer the smug, arrogant invaders. They were now desperate, furious, and humanity had provoked a beast. "Move out! Secure the central core!" Davis commanded, her voice steady as the crew prepared for the next phase of their assault. The boarding teams, all hardened soldiers from across the globe, began their march, each one ready for the battle to come. They knew the stakes. Earth's survival depended on their ability to cripple the heart of the Draxian mothership. And that meant taking out the command nexus, the Draxian leadership, and their most vital systems. Davis motioned to Commander Liu, who had already geared up for the mission. "Liu, take point. Find their central control center. We need to cut off their communication and disable their weapons systems. We can't afford another round of bombardment." "Aye, Captain," Liu responded, his face hard with determination. "We'll make it happen." The corridor ahead of them was a vast, unfamiliar maze, alien in both design and architecture. The walls pulsated with a strange, organic rhythm, as if the ship itself was alive. Alien symbols, constantly shifting and changing, carved into the walls like living graffiti, lit up the path. This was the heart of the Draxian Empire, and it was a far cry from anything humanity had ever seen. The air inside the mothership was thick with the scent of burning circuitry. But beneath that, there was something else. A coldness, an emptiness. The ship had once been a symbol of domination, but now it was just a dying thing, fighting for its life. The boarding team moved quickly but cautiously. Their steps echoed in the strange halls, the soft hum of the Draxian technology around them contrasting sharply with their own heavy mechanical footsteps. It wasn't long before they encountered the first line of defense, a squad of Draxian warriors, their bodies lithe and covered in organic armor. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and their weapons, formed from the very bones of their bodies, hissed with energy. The humans wasted no time. They opened fire, their weapons unleashing torrents of gunfire that lit up the hallway. The Draxian warriors retaliated with deadly accuracy, their movements fast and fluid, far beyond anything human soldiers were accustomed to. But the humans weren't just soldiers. They were survivors. Grenades bounced off the walls, explosions shattering the tense silence of the alien ship. Each explosion sent Draxian soldiers hurtling through the air, their bodies contorted in strange, unnatural ways. The humans fought with a brutal efficiency, targeting the Draxians' weak spots with deadly precision. Elena Vance, one of the lead engineers turned soldiers, led the charge. Her rifle fired in bursts, each shot hitting its mark. Her face was smeared with dirt and blood. Her eyes locked in focus as the sounds of combat reverberated through her mind. But she didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. Humanity had come too far to lose now. "We're pushing them back!" Markov shouted from behind her, his own rifle smoking from the barrage of fire he'd just unleashed. "Don't get cocky," Elena barked, her voice laced with urgency. "There's still a long way to go. Move!" The squad advanced, systematically clearing rooms and corridors. They encountered more resistance at every turn. The Draxians fought back ferociously, their strange weapons capable of burning through walls, their natural strength allowing them to overpower humans in close-quarters combat. But with every step, the humans advanced. Every inch they gained was another piece of Earth's survival. Through the halls of the Draxian mothership, Elena could hear the faint hum of the command center, its location only a few corridors ahead. They were getting close. "Keep moving," Elena urged, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "We're almost there. Liu, we need to breach the command center and shut it down." They reached the door to the control nexus, a massive alien door that looked like a living thing in itself. Its surface shifted and pulsed, as if it were breathing. Without hesitation, Elena raised her rifle and fired directly at the door's center. The impact cracked the alien material, but it didn't break. She fired again, and again, each shot weakening the barrier. "We've got company," Liu called out as another wave of Draxian warriors appeared from around the corner, weapons raised. "We don't have time for this!" Elena shouted. "Cover me, I'm going in!" Without waiting for a response, Elena dashed forward, her heart pounding as she dove toward the door. The Draxians, seeing her move, surged toward her, their energy weapons crackling with deadly force. Elena reached the door, slammed her shoulder into it, and pressed the detonator. A series of controlled charges exploded, sending shards of alien material flying in all directions. The door was down. Inside the command center, the true heart of the Draxian invasion fleet, Elena's team was met with a sight more terrifying than any they had imagined. The room was vast, its walls covered in strange, shifting symbols. At the center, a massive living mass of alien technology and organic matter pulsed ominously. It was their central core, the brain of the ship, and possibly the entire Draxian fleet. Elena's breath caught in her throat. This was no mere machine. This was something far worse. It was alive. The creature at the center of the room opened its eyes that glowed with a sickly, unnatural light. A voice, not one that could be heard, but one that was felt deep within the mind, rang out. "You will fall. Your species is doomed. This is our domain now." Elena didn't flinch. She raised her weapon, aiming at the creature. "Not today," she muttered, and she fired. The shot echoed through the room, a defiant cry against the horrors the Draxians had brought. But this was only the beginning. The battle for humanity's survival had just entered its next phase. The shot rang out, echoing off the walls of the Draxian command center. The projectile struck the heart of the creature, the twisted nexus of organic and mechanical life that powered the mothership. It shuddered violently, emitting a high-pitched screech that rattled the entire room. The alien vessel seemed to recoil in pain, as though it felt the blow deep within its core. The room hummed with an eerie, unnatural energy, as if the ship itself was alive, wounded and in fury. For a split second, everything went quiet. The Draxian creatures, their sleek alien forms still lingering at the far edges of the room, watched in stunned silence. Even the pulse of the living walls seemed to slow, as if holding its breath. Elena Vance stood her ground, her rifle still raised, her finger lingering on the trigger. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing on her. Every soldier under her command had given everything to get to this point. If she failed, everything, Earth's survival, the future of humanity, would be for nothing. And she would not allow that, not after all they had fought for. The creature at the center of the room, a massive, organic, alien brain surrounded by tendrils and pulsating veins, began to thrash violently, as if waking from a deep slumber. Its eyes, glowing a sickly green, fixed on Elena with terrifying intensity. It was trying to communicate, trying to break through her mind, to speak directly into her thoughts. You cannot win, human. You cannot fight us. We are ancient. We are eternal. Your pathetic species is nothing in the face of the Draxian Empire. Elena's skin prickled with the alien voice that vibrated inside her head. It felt like the entire room was pressing in on her, suffocating her with the weight of the creature's contempt. She gritted her teeth, steadying her breath, refusing to let the alien presence break her resolve. She had heard rumors, whispers among the survivors, about the Draxians' ability to manipulate minds, to twist them, to make them see things that weren't real. But Elena had never been one to give in to fear, no matter how overwhelming. "Number, you're wrong," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tumult inside her. "We are more than you think. We will fight for every inch of this planet, and we will make you remember that." The creature recoiled, its tendrils flailing as though it had been struck again. The pulse of energy that had filled the room seemed to ripple outward, the walls shuddering under the impact. Suddenly, the ground beneath Elena's feet trembled, and the entire room seemed to warp, as if the very fabric of reality was bending in response to the creature's rage. "Captain!" Liu shouted from behind, snapping Elena out of her trance. "We've got company! They're bringing in reinforcements!" Elena turned to see a fresh wave of Draxian warriors flooding into the room. Their weapons, gleaming with an unnatural glow, crackled with deadly energy. The soldiers moved with terrifying speed, their bodies shifting and changing, adapting to the chaotic environment as though the battlefield itself were an extension of their will. They didn't speak. They didn't hesitate. They simply moved with brutal efficiency. Without a second thought, Elena raised her rifle again, aiming at the incoming wave. Her squad, already in position, opened fire, the sharp staccato of their weapons slicing through the air. The first Draxian warrior fell, its body crumpling into a heap as the energy from the bullets ripped through its armor. But the next wave came on, unrelenting. They moved faster, adapted more quickly, and their numbers seemed to grow by the second. "Fall back!" Elena shouted to her team. "We need to get to the core! Liu, cover the door!" Commander Liu and the rest of the squad formed a defensive perimeter as Elena sprinted toward the central core of the Draxian command center. Every step felt like an eternity, the adrenaline pumping through her veins, urging her forward even as the weight of the fight began to bear down on her. Her eyes darted around the room as explosions erupted around her, the walls shaking with the force of the battle. She could hear the screams of her soldiers and the guttural roars of the Draxian warriors, but she refused to be distracted. The core was in sight. She could feel the creature's presence behind her, could feel its rage burning through her thoughts, but she focused on one thing: getting to the heart of the enemy's ship and cutting its power. The Reaper's engines had already made a direct hit, but that wasn't enough. The Draxians still had control. They still had the ability to launch their weapons and rain destruction down on Earth. Elena couldn't allow that. If they didn't stop it here, humanity would be wiped out. It was as simple as that. "Get ready!" Liu's voice crackled through her comm. We need to breach that core. If we don't, we'll finish it, Lou, Elena shouted back, determination cutting through her words like a knife. This ends now. She reached the central control nexus, the heart of the Draxian warship. It was unlike anything she had ever seen, an immense, pulsating mass of alien technology, organic veins twisting through its surface like some grotesque brain. The very walls around her seemed to bend and shift, the room alive with an almost symbiotic energy. The control center was everything, the mind of the mothership, the command center for the Draxian fleet, and the only way to ensure Earth's survival. Elena fired another shot, this time targeting the core's energy matrix. A burst of light filled the room, and the massive structure trembled, its pulsing rhythm slowing as if the ship were weakening. But the creature at its center shrieked again, a guttural sound that seemed to reverberate in the very bones of the ship. It was not just a machine. It was alive, and it was angry. "Elena, look out!" Liu shouted from across the room. But it was too late. The creature's tendrils shot out with lightning speed, wrapping around Elena's body before she could react. The force was like being caught in a vice, squeezing the air from her lungs as the alien strength crushed her against the floor. Her vision blurred, and for a moment she thought she was done. The creature's voice rang in her ears once more, a deep, resonating thought that filled her mind with dread. "You cannot stop us. You cannot survive." But Elena's hand didn't waver. Despite the crushing weight of the tendrils, despite the overwhelming power of the creature, she reached for the detonator strapped to her waist. The last resort. The one thing that could sever the Draxians' grip on Earth and destroy their warship from the inside out. The detonator was simple, small, and yet it held the potential to bring down the entire ship. She had one shot, one chance to make the enemy pay for every inch of ground they had taken. With a final desperate breath, Elena slammed her finger down on the button. The explosion was deafening. The walls of the command center ruptured as the core began to implode, sending shockwaves through the ship. The tendrils released their grip on Elena's body, and she was thrown backward, her body slamming into the cold, hard floor. She didn't know if she was alive or dead, but she didn't care. Outside, the ship began to shake violently, and the Draxian mothership screamed in agony. The battle for Earth wasn't over, but they had taken the first step. Humanity had struck back, and the Draxians would never forget this day. Elena's vision blurred as the world around her seemed to crumble. Through the haze, she saw the faces of her team, their own expressions twisted with pain but also determination. They had fought for this moment, and they would not let it slip away. The war was far from over, but humanity had just made its mark on the stars. The galaxy would never look at Earth the same way again. The explosion that tore through the heart of the Draxian mothership was unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. It was as if time itself had stopped for a moment, the space around her vibrating with an immense, raw power. The walls around her shattered in an instant, and the once imposing structure of the command center crumbled to dust, disintegrating in a burst of fire and energy. The shockwave sent her hurtling through the air, her body thrown like a rag doll, slamming into the twisted remains of a support column. She felt the air leave her lungs as her body hit the ground with brutal force, and for a moment she thought the world had ended. But she wasn't dead. She wasn't finished. Not yet. Her ears were ringing, the sound of the blast still echoing in her head. The world was spinning, her vision a blur of smoke and debris. The last thing she remembered was the explosion, the moment her finger had pressed the detonator, and the way the ship had groaned in its final death throes. Now, all around her, the Draxian mothership was collapsing, its structure buckling under the force of the destruction. The ship that had once seemed invincible, its unyielding presence in the sky now reduced to nothing more than a sinking titan. "Elena!" Lou's voice broke through the haze, a lifeline in the chaos. She blinked, her mind struggling to focus. Her vision slowly cleared, and she saw the familiar figure of Commander Liu emerging from the smoke. Blood streaked across his face, his armor scorched and dented but still standing. "Liu!" she croaked, her throat raw from the explosion. Her body ached, her muscles screaming in protest as she tried to sit up, but every movement sent a wave of pain through her bones. The force of the blast had rattled her to her core, but the mission was far from over. "We've got to move, Captain," Liu said, his voice laced with urgency. He extended a hand, pulling her up with surprising strength. His eyes were wide, alert. He was still focused. Elena took his hand and struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady but holding her weight. The room around them was a disaster. The once sleek walls of the command center had been ripped apart, leaving jagged metal and charred remains where the heart of the Draxian ship had been. Sparks flickered in the remnants of alien machinery, and a low, ominous hum reverberated through the shattered hull. The entire mothership groaned in agony, the entire structure beginning to break apart. Fires raged in the distance, and the hiss of escaping gases filled the air. The Draxians' once pristine ship was now a dying beast, its life force flickering with each passing second. "Captain!" Markov's voice called out, coming from behind them. He too had survived, though the damage to his armor was significant, a large dent in the chest plate and scorch marks along his arm. He was dragging an injured soldier behind him, but his eyes were sharp. "We need to get out of here. The ship is falling apart faster than we thought. It's going to break apart any second." Elena took a deep breath, trying to shake off the dizziness. She looked around, assessing the situation. The exit was only a few meters away, but getting to it would be a challenge. The hallways were twisted, the walls warping from the internal explosions, and the pressure from the failing systems was palpable. There was no time to waste. She could feel the clock ticking down, every passing second inching them closer to death. "We move now, or we die here," Elena said, her voice cutting through the air, steel in her tone. She glanced at Liu, then at Markov. "Get everyone out now. We're not leaving anyone behind." Without another word, they moved. The remaining crew, those who were still alive, gathered behind Elena, forming a tight group as they made their way through the crumbling halls. The ship was buckling around them, its walls groaning and cracking with each passing minute. The vibrations were becoming more intense, and the light flickered in and out, casting an eerie glow on the decaying interior. The corridors were becoming harder to navigate, as massive chunks of debris fell from the ceiling, blocking their path. Elena's mind raced as she pushed forward, each step taking them closer to the exit, but each step also bringing them closer to the final destruction of the ship. They encountered more resistance as they moved deeper into the belly of the dying mothership. The Draxian warriors had not given up. If anything, they were more determined than ever, their bioweapons drawn, and their alien eyes glowing with rage. Elena had expected this. The Draxians were relentless, but humanity's spirit was more resilient than anything they had encountered. "We'll hold them off," Liu said, turning to face the rear. "Cover the exit. Move!" Before Elena could respond, Liu and his squad broke off, turning to face the incoming Draxians. The fighting was brutal. The Draxians fought with a fluidity that was terrifying, their movements almost inhuman as they slashed and struck with their bio-weaponized limbs. But Liu and his team stood their ground, firing relentlessly, pushing back against the oncoming wave. Elena's heart pounded in her chest as she watched her soldiers fight. She knew they couldn't hold this position for long. They had to get out of the ship before it collapsed entirely. "Go!" Liu shouted over his shoulder, his voice strained but determined. "We've got this." Elena hesitated, a flicker of doubt flashing through her mind. Liu was right. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. She turned on her heel and sprinted forward, leading the remaining survivors toward the exit. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in on them as the ship continued to shake and groan. The atmosphere was thick with the acrid stench of burning metal and the low rumble of the ship's dying systems. They reached the exit bay, the last escape route for the Reaper's crew. The massive doors were closed, and Elena felt a surge of panic. If they didn't get out now, they would be trapped inside. She reached for the emergency override switch, but the door refused to budge. Come on, Elena muttered, her fingers flying over the control panel. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked desperately, but the system was unresponsive. The blast had damaged everything. There was no time left. "Captain!" Markov shouted from behind her. "They're closing in! We need to move!" Elena's heart raced. Her mind screamed for a solution, but there was no time for complex plans. With a final push, she slammed her hand down on the emergency release. The massive doors groaned as they began to open, slowly at first, then faster, until they were wide enough for the crew to slip through. "Move," Elena ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. One by one, the soldiers began to file through the gap, Markov helping the wounded. As Elena was about to pass through, she turned back to see Liu and his team still holding the line, firing their weapons and slowly retreating towards the exit. They were close. So close. "Liu!" Elena shouted, her voice desperate. "Get to the door!" "We're almost there," Liu called back, but his voice was strained, the sound of blaster fire echoing in the background. His team was fighting hard, but they couldn't keep the Draxians at bay for much longer. The last of the survivors passed through the door, and Elena took a final glance at the chaos unfolding behind them. The ship was on the verge of total collapse, and Liu's team was too far behind to make it out in time. The walls were caving in, the entire structure of the Draxian mothership unraveling as the destruction spread. She could hear the deafening roar of the failing systems, the entire ship beginning to come apart at the seams. "Liu!" Elena screamed again, her voice hoarse. She couldn't leave him. She couldn't leave anyone behind. But there was no time. She turned, forcing herself to sprint toward the escape pod, the final refuge for humanity. As the doors closed behind her, the last of the Draxian ship's structure crumbled, and she was launched into the air, the force of the blast sending them tumbling toward the planet below. They had survived the impossible, but they weren't out of danger yet. The battle for Earth was far from over. The escape pod plunged through the atmosphere like a falling star, its hull groaning under the pressure as it descended toward Earth. Elena clutched the restraints tightly, her knuckles white from the force. The pod vibrated violently, its systems struggling to stay intact as it screamed through the sky, a roaring inferno of fire and heat. Outside, the planet loomed, closer and closer, the familiar blue and green of Earth's surface growing rapidly in their view. Inside the pod, the rest of the crew was silent, their faces grim, but filled with relief. Their mission had been a success in ways they could hardly comprehend. The Draxian mothership, once an unstoppable force, was now nothing but a broken wreckage, its systems failing, its command nexus destroyed. But as they fell toward Earth, Elena knew this battle was far from over. "Brace for impact," the pod's automated systems warned, jolting them all to attention. The ground below rose quickly, and the final seconds were a blur of chaos. With a sharp screech, the pod slammed into the ground with a bone-shattering impact, throwing Elena and the others against their restraints. The sound of metal tearing and the screech of the pod's hull reverberated through the air as it came to a sudden halt. Then, silence. For a moment, there was only the heavy pounding of Elena's heart in her chest. She blinked, disoriented, then forced herself to breathe deeply as the shock of the crash started to wear off. Slowly, she unbuckled herself from the harness, her body aching from the impact. She took a breath, feeling the weight of her exhaustion. But there was no time to rest, not yet. "Status report," Elena barked, her voice hoarse. Markov, who had been sitting beside her, was already on his feet. He looked through the small, cracked viewport at the barren, desolate landscape outside. They had crash-landed in what appeared to be a remote, mountainous region, far from any major cities or military installations. "We're down, Captain," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and caution. "We've got some damage, but we've survived." "Everyone else?" Elena asked, her eyes scanning the faces of the remaining survivors. "Alive, Captain. But we've lost communications with the rest of the fleet. We're on our own for now." Elena nodded, pushing past the initial wave of relief. She knew the true battle was only just beginning. The Draxians might have lost their mothership, but their fleet wasn't all in one ship. Their forces were vast, spread across the galaxy, and now they had just one more reason to destroy Earth. If they hadn't understood the resolve of humanity before, they would now. "How long until we can get the pod back into working condition?" Elena asked, her tone pragmatic despite the gravity of the situation. Markov was already fiddling with the console, his fingers flying over the controls. "A few hours, maybe. The main systems are shot, but we can repair the communication array. It'll take time, but it's not impossible." "Good. Get to work," Elena ordered, already making her way toward the hatch. She had no intention of sitting idly by while the Draxians regrouped. If they had underestimated humanity once, they wouldn't make that mistake again. The cold mountain air greeted them as the hatch opened. Earth's atmosphere felt like a lifeline, raw, real, and filled with the promise of hope. They had fought for this. The battle was far from won, but humanity had shown its resilience, its strength. And now, it was time to take the next step. Outside, the remnants of the Draxian fleet could still be seen in the sky, a handful of scattered ships, retreating but not defeated. The second mothership that had been inbound was still out there, its massive form still intact. The battle had shifted, but the Draxians weren't finished. Elena adjusted her gear, the cold biting at her face as she stepped onto the rocky terrain. "Markov," she said, turning back to the others. "We need to start gathering resources. I don't know how long it will take for their reinforcements to arrive, but we need to be ready. This isn't over. The Draxians might be down, but they're not out." Markov nodded grimly, signaling to the others to begin unloading the emergency supplies from the pod. There was no time to waste. The crew, though battered and bruised, had a job to do. They were the last line of defense, the ones who had survived against insurmountable odds, and they would fight to the last breath to protect Earth. The mountain air was thin, but it didn't matter. Every breath felt like a victory, and as Elena surveyed the horizon, she could already feel the spark of determination growing inside her. They had struck back, they had fought, and they had won the first round. But the war was far from over. In the distance, the horizon darkened as more ships, smaller and faster than the mothership, began to descend toward the planet. The Draxians were regrouping. Their fury would be unleashed again. Elena knew that in the coming days, weeks, and months, they would face a relentless onslaught. The fight wasn't just for survival anymore. It was for the future of the entire planet. "Prepare yourselves," Elena said, her voice steady despite the storm that was about to hit. "The galaxy will never forget the day Earth fought back. We'll make sure of that." With her team at her side, Elena Vance led the way, marching forward into the unknown. They had survived the impossible, but that was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned one thing today, that Earth would never kneel, and humanity's spirit would never be broken. And as they set off into the mountains, ready to rebuild, ready to prepare for the next wave, one thing was certain. Earth would stand no matter what came next.